Hey, great to see everyone. I am here standing on the Mount of Olives with my good friend, Erez Sasson. And behind us is the Dome of the Rock, the Temple Mount. And I'm going to read a couple of scriptures for you, and then I'm going to turn it over to Erez to help us connect some dots, some things that I'm pretty confident most people have never studied before. But when I think of this from Matthew chapter 24, I can think of the prophetic implications. And in Matthew chapter 24, the Bible begins in verse 1. Then Jesus went out and he departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. So you can imagine the temple being back there above the Temple Mount, or built upon the Temple Mount at that time. So Jesus departed from there, and Jesus said to the disciples, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." Verse 3 then continues. Now the whole scenery changes. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" I think of those words, and then Jesus went on to teach what's commonly referred to as the Olivet Discourse and signs about the second coming of Christ when Jesus comes back. However, there's a lot more to this Mount of Olives than that, and we're going to go all the way back to the Old Testament, the time of the first temple, the second temple, and I'm going to turn it over to Erez. Erez, great to have you with me again.
Great to be here again, Pastor Tom. We're looking toward the west. We're on the Mount of Olives, and throughout history, the Mount of Olives always outside of the territory of Jerusalem. Actually, the eastern border is the Kidron Valley, also known as the Valley of Jehoshaphat, just below us. And the city of Jerusalem always had to be pure, like any other Jewish city around the world, but especially Jerusalem. From the beginning, its holiness was clear to all. The tradition that the rock of foundation lies on Mount Moriah. And I know it's hard to see a mount here. That's because of the work of Herod the Great. But I assure you, 3,000 years ago, in the time of Solomon, when he built the first temple, there was a low hill or mount called Mount Moriah, and the first temple was really on the peak of it. I personally believe it's exactly where the Dome of the Rock lies. Why they call it the Dome of the Rock? The Dome of the Rock of Foundation, coming from the Jewish tradition. From that rock, the world was created. Again, by the Jewish tradition. That mount continued with its holiness even before the temples were built, when by tradition Abraham brought his son Isaac to show his faith in God and wanted to offer him to God. But of course we know the ending, how the Lord stopped him and he offered a ram instead of it. When Solomon built the temple, it would be on the peak over there. The second temple that was built after the return from exile from Babylon was at the exact same spot, but it would be only in the time of Herod the Great that the temple was one of the most exciting, the most richest, the most biggest structures in the world at that time. For they said, if you haven't seen the temple of the Jews, you haven't seen such a wonderful and amazing structure in your lifetime. And that was the scenery that Yeshua and the Jews back then in the day saw. A big temple on Mount Moriah, and the plaza, the area of where the temple stood, was all the work of Herod the Great. He wanted to fit a big structure upon a small mount called Mount Moriah, so he changed it. He added soil and rocks, built a retaining wall, and a big base upon which he could build a big structure of his dreams. And he made it happen. But of course, in the year 70 AD, the second temple was destroyed, and as it's written in our scriptures, the third temple would be built when time comes, when the Lord allows it to be.
By the way, Erez, I'm pretty confident everybody listening right now can hear that noise in the background. And hey, just so you know, that noise, we're on the Mount of Olives, and they still trim the olive trees out here on the Mount of Olives. And a beautiful garden that's here. The Garden of Gethsemane is located over here too. So that's the noise that you hear. It's the gardening equipment. Erez, I want to ask you about the glory of God. I'm going to ask you to take us back to the Old Testament, because we also know from the Old Testament that Yeshua is going to return and he's going to stand on this mountain and it's going to split in two. But that's from Zechariah. But let's go all the way back to the Shekinah glory of God and the book of Ezekiel, because I think you have some things to share that almost nobody ever hears about.
Yes, Pastor. We remember when the first temple stood, it was clear that the Ark of the Covenant was in the Holy of Holies in the inner room, in the western room of the temple. They used to lie right over there. And inside the Holy of Holies, there was the glory of God, called the Shekhinah in Hebrew, the Shekinah, and the Ark of the Covenant that did exist in the first temple period. After the time of the first temple, we're not sure where it was taken, but after the destruction of the first temple, we read that the Shekinah, the glory of God, moved from where the Mount Moriah was to the eastern mount. I just want to connect the scriptures to Ezekiel 11, verse 23, and it says there, "And the glory of the Lord went up from the midst of the city and stood on the mountain which is on the east side of the city," where we are. So the Shekinah waited here until the second temple would be built. And the second temple was built something like 70 years after the destruction, when the southern kingdom of Judah, returned back to the land from Babylon. And the second temple was built in the time of Ezra, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, and then the Shekinah returned back into the temple area and gathered inside the inner room, meaning the Holy of Holies. But then we know that in the year 70, the Romans destroyed the second temple, and we don't have anything to tell us where the Shekinah went. But we do read in the New Testament that in Zechariah, we do read in Zechariah 14 that Messiah is going to return upon the Mount of Olives, and so many things, supernatural things, are going to happen around here. But the Shekinah, Yeshua, the glory of God, will appear once again on the Mount of Olives, and then he would make his way into Mount Moriah, into where the temples used to stand.
Wow, that's exciting to me. Just thinking here is where the Shekinah glory of God waited while Babylon had destroyed Judah, Jerusalem. During that whole time, the whole 70 years, just waited and waited. And now Yeshua waiting in heaven to return to this spot. It's exciting to start connecting these things. And there's so many other things in the Bible connected with the Mount of Olives, of course, the Garden of Gethsemane, but we think of Yeshua before on Palm Sunday, leaving the area of Bethany, and comes up over the Mount of Olives and comes into Jerusalem as the people are shouting, "Hosanna, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Amen. And so much is here, and looking out at Jerusalem, to me, the most beautiful city in the world.
I have to agree, and although I'm 11th generation here and I see Jerusalem every day coming here, I get excited. I connect scriptures, my imagination runs, because we know through the scriptures what will happen when Messiah returns, right? It says that the mountain will split to the north and to the south, and a valley would be formed here. And then it says that in Ezekiel 47, also later on in Zechariah 14, that a spring will rise from Mount Moriah. Water will start flowing to the Kidron Valley, and the water level will be high. The Kidron from here flows, connecting to the Ben Hinnom Valley to the east, meaning to the Dead Sea area, and the water from the temple area would feed the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea will come alive. That's what scriptures tell us. And also Yerushalayim, that I remember we talked about Psalm 125, that the mountains surround Jerusalem, so as the Lord surrounds his people. By that point, the Mount Moriah, the mountain of Yerushalayim, will rise and be the highest. So it will be quite a phenomenon. It will be quite a scenery when that happens. It would be the highest out of all the mountains surrounding here.
This is so exciting to see it now and to see it when we come back with Yeshua. To me, there's nothing better that you could possibly experience in this entire universe. Erez, this has been great with you standing here on the Mount of Olives. Hey, listen everyone, we have more of these videos coming from various places. Like and share this, and also join us in Jerusalem on one of our upcoming tours, or if you can't join us, join somebody who actually believes that the Bible is true. God bless.
Shalom.